Welcome to AristotleWalks, where amazing philosophy papers are read aloud. The YouTube channel's aim is to make philosophy more accessible, specifically for those with vision impairments. Today we have a guest, my dear friend Adrian Ommundsen, to help present David and Stephanie Lewis's amazing dialogue, Holes, published in 1970. This dialogue has two characters, Argle and Bargle. Adrian will portray Argle, and I will portray Bargle. Here we go. Part 1.
I believe in nothing but concrete material objects.
There are many of your opinions I applaud, but one of your less pleasing characteristics is your fondness for the doctrines of nominalism and materialism. Every time you get started on any such topic, I know we are in for a long argument. Where shall we start this time? Numbers, colors, lengths, sets, force fields, sensations, or what?
Fictions all. I've thought hard about every one of them.
A long evening's work. Before we start, let me find you a snack. Will you have some crackers and cheese?
Thank you. What splendid Gruyere.
You know, there are remarkably many holes in this piece.
There are.
Got you. Part 2. You admit there are many holes in that piece of cheese. Therefore, there are some holes in it. Therefore, there are some holes. In other words, holes exist. But holes are not made of matter. To the contrary, they result from the absence of matter.
I did say that there are holes in the cheese, but that is not to imply that there are holes.
However not. If you say that there are A's that are B's, you are committed logically to the conclusion that there are A's.
When I say that there are holes in something, I mean nothing more nor less than that it is perforated. The synonymous shape predicates is perforated and the predicate there are holes in, just like any other shape predicate, say the predicate is a dodecahedron, may truly be predicated of pieces of cheese without any implication that perforation is due to the presence of occult immaterial entities. I am sorry my innocent predicate confuses you by sounding like an idiom of existential quantification, so that you think that inferences involving it are valid when they are not. But I have my reasons. You, given a perforated piece of cheese, and believing as you do that it is perforated because it contains immaterial entities called holes, employ an idiom of existential quantification to say falsely, there are holes in it. Agreeable fellow that I am, I wish to have a sentence that sounds like yours, and that is true exactly when you falsely suppose your existential quantification over immaterial things to be true. That way, we could talk about the cheese without philosophizing, if only you'd let me. You and I would understand our sentences differently, but the difference wouldn't interfere with our conversation until you start drawing conclusions which follow from your false sentence, but not from my homonymous true sentence.
Oh, very well, but behold, there are as many holes in my piece of cheese as in yours. Do you agree?
I'll take your word for it without even counting. There are as many holes in mine as in yours. But what I mean by that is that either both pieces are singly perforated, or both are doubly perforated, or both are triply perforated, and so on.
What a lot of different shape predicates you know. However did you find time to learn them all? And what does "and so on" mean?
Let me just say that the two pieces are equally perforated. Now I've used only one two-place predicate.
Unless I singly perforate each of these crackers, how will you say that there are as many holes in my cheese as crackers on my plate? Be so kind as not to invent another predicate on the spot. I am quite prepared to go on until you have told me about all the predicates you have up your sleeve. I have a good imagination and plenty of time.
Oh dear.
Part 3.
I was wrong. There are holes.
You recant?
No. Holes are material objects.
I expected that sooner. You are thinking, doubtless, that every hole is filled with matter, silver amalgam, Air, interstellar gas, luminiferous ether, or whatever it may be.
No, perhaps there are no truly empty holes, but I cannot deny that there might be.
How can something utterly devoid of matter be made of matter?
You're looking for the matter in the wrong place. I mean to say, that's what you would be doing if there were any such things as places, which there aren't. The matter isn't inside the hole. It would be absurd to say it was. Nobody wants to say that holes are inside themselves. The matter surrounds the hole. The lining of a hole, you agree, is a material object. For every hole, there is a hole lining. For every hole lining, there is a hole. I say the hole lining is the hole.
Part 4. Didn't you say that the hole lining surrounds the hole? Things don't surround themselves.
Holes do. In my language, surrounds, said of a hole described as such, means is identical with. Surrounds, said of other things, means just what you think it means.
Doesn't it bother you that your dictionary must have 2 entries under surrounds when mine has only 1?
A little, but not much. I'm used to putting up with such things.
Such what?
Such dictionary entries. They're made of dried ink, you recall.
Oh, I suppose you'll also say that the predicate is in or the predicate is through, said of a whole means the predicate is part of.
Exactly so, Bargle.
Then do you still say that there are holes in the cheese contains an unanalyzed shape predicate synonymous with the predicate is perforated?
No, it is an existential quantification, as you think it is. It means that there exist material objects such that they are holes and they are parts of the piece of cheese.
Part 5. But we wouldn't say, would we, that a hole is made out of cheese?
No, but the fact that we wouldn't say it doesn't mean it isn't true. We wouldn't have occasion to say, unless philosophizing, that these walls are perpendicular to the floor. But they are. Anyhow, we do say that caves are holes in the ground, and that some of them are made out of limestone.
Part 6. Take this paper towel roller, spin it on a lathe. The whole lining spins. Surely you'd never say the whole spins.
Why not?
Even though the whole might continue to be entirely filled with a dowel that didn't spin or move at all?
What difference does that make?
None, really, but now I have you. Take a toilet paper roller, put it inside the paper towel roller, and spin it the other way. The big hole spins clockwise. The little hole spins counterclockwise. But the little hole is part of the big hole, so it spins clockwise along with the rest of the big hole. So if holes can spin, as you think, the little hole turns out to be spinning in both directions at once, which is absurd.
I see why you might think that the little hole is part of the big hole, but you can't expect me to agree. The little hole is inside the big hole, but that's all. Hence, I have no reason to say that the little hole is spinning clockwise.
Part 7. Consider a thin-walled hole with a gallon of water inside. The volume of the hole is at least a gallon, whereas the volume of the hole lining is much less. If the hole is the hole lining, then whatever was true of one would have to be true of the other. They could not differ in volume.
For hole, read bottle. For hole lining, also read bottle. You have the same paradox. Holes, like bottles, have volume, or, as I'd rather say, are voluminous or equivoluminous with other things, in 2 different senses. There's the volume of the hole or bottle itself, and there's the volume of the largest chunk of fluid which could be put inside the hole or bottle without compression. For holes, as for bottles, contextual clues permit us to keep track of which we mean.
Part 8. What is the volume of the hole itself? How much of the cheese do you include as part of one of these holes? And how do you decide? Arbitrarily, that's how. Don't try saying you include as little of the cheese as possible, for however much you include, you could have included less.
What we call a single whole is really many whole linings. Some include more of the cheese, some include less. Therefore, I need not decide, arbitrarily or otherwise, how much cheese is part of the whole. Many different decisions are equally correct.
How can a single whole be identical with many whole linings that are not identical with one another?
Really, there are many different wholes, and each is identical with a different whole lining. But all these different wholes are the same whole.
You contradict yourself. Don't you mean to say that they all surround the same whole? Whereby surround, I mean surround, not be identical with.
Not at all. I would contradict myself if I said that two different wholes were identical, but I didn't. What I said was that they were the same whole. Two wholes are the same whole when they have a common part that is itself a whole.
You agreed before that there were as many holes in my cheese as crackers on my plate. Are there still?
Yes, there are two of each left.
2 crackers, to be sure, but how can you say there are 2 holes?
Thus, there is a hole, and there is another hole that is not the same hole, and every hole in the cheese is the same hole as one or the other.
Be so kind as to say co-perforated, not same, and stop pretending to talk about identity when you are not. I understand you now. Co-perforation is supposed to be an equivalence relation among whole linings, and when you say there are 2 holes, you are trying to say that there are 2 non-identical co-perforation classes of whole linings. Really, you identify holes not with whole linings, but with classes of whole linings.
I would if I could, but I can't. No, holes are whole linings, but when I speak of them as holes, I find it convenient to use same, meaning co-perforated, wherever a man of your persuasion would use same, meaning identical. You know my reason for this trickery. My sentences about sameness of holes will be true just when you wrongly suppose your like-sounding sentences to be. The same goes for sentences about number of holes, since we both analyze these in terms of sameness.
Part 9. You still haven't told me how you say there are as many holes in my cheese as crackers on my plate, without also saying how many there are.
Here goes. There exist 3 things, x, y, and z. X is part of the sum of the crackers, y is part of the cheese, and z is part of y. Every maximal connected part of y is a whole, and every hole in the cheese is the same whole as some maximal connected part of y. X overlaps each of the crackers, and z overlaps each maximal connected part of y. Everything which is either the intersection of x and a cracker, or the intersection of z and some maximal connected part of y, is the same size as any other such thing. X is the same size as z.
Part 10. Your devices won't work because co-perforation is not an equivalence relation. Any 2 overlapping parts of my cheese have a common part that is a whole lining, though in most cases the whole lining is entirely filled with cheese. To be co-perforated is therefore nothing more than to overlap, and overlapping is no equivalence relation. The result is that, although, as you say, you can find 2 whole linings in this cheese that are not co-perforated, you can find another one that is co-perforated with both of them.
If you were right that a hole made of cheese could be entirely filled with the same kind of cheese, you could find far more than 2 non-co-perforated whole linings, and there would be no such thing as cheese without holes in it. But you're wrong. A hole is a hole not just by virtue of its own shape, but also by virtue of the way it contrasts with the matter inside it and around it. The same is true of other shape predicates. I wouldn't say that any part of the cheese is a dodecahedron, though I admit that there are parts that do not contrast with their surroundings, that are shaped like dodecahedra.
Consider the paper towel roller. How many holes?
1. You know what I mean. Many, but they're all the same.
I think you must say that there are at least 2. The left half and the right half are not the same hole. They have no common part, so no common part that is a hole.
They're not holes. They're 2 parts of a hole.
Why aren't they holes themselves? They are singly perforated, and they are made of matter unlike the matter inside them. If I cut them apart, you'd have to say they were holes?
Yes.
You admit that a hole can be a proper part of a bigger, say, thicker-skinned hole?
Yes.
You admit that they are shaped like holes?
Yes, but they aren't holes. I can't say why they aren't. I know which things are holes, but I can't give you a definition. But why should I? You already know what hole linings are. I say the 2 halves of the roller are only parts of a hole because I, like you, would say they are only parts of a hole lining. What isn't a hole lining isn't a hole.
In that case, I admit that co-perforation may be an equivalence relation at least among singly perforated hole linings.
All holes are singly perforated. A doubly perforated thing has 2 holes in it that are not the same hole.
Are you sure? Take the paper towel roller and punch a little hole in its side. Now you have a hole in a hole lining. You'd have to say you have a hole in a hole. You have a little hole which is part of a big hole. The big hole is not singly perforated, and the little hole and the big hole are the same hole, since the little hole is a common part of each.
I think not. You speak of the big hole, but what we have are 2 big holes, not the same, laid end to end. There is also the little hole, not the same as either big hole, which overlaps them both. Of course, we sometimes call something a hole in a derivative sense if it is a connected sum of holes. Any decent cave consists of many holes that are not the same hole, so I must have been speaking in this derivative sense when I said that caves are holes.
What peculiar things you are driven to say when philosophy corrupts your mind! Tell me the truth. Would you have dreamt for a moment of saying there were 2 big holes rather than 1 if you were not suffering under the influence of a philosophical theory?
No, I fear I would have remained ignorant.
See that I can never hope to refute you, since I no sooner reduce your position to absurdity than you embrace the absurdity.
Not absurdity, disagreement with common opinion.
Very well, but I, for one, have more trust in common opinions than I do in any philosophical reasoning whatever. Insofar as you disagree with them, you must pay a great price in the plausibility of your theories.
Agreed. We have been measuring that price. I have shown that it is not so great as you thought. I am prepared to pay it. My theories can earn credence by their clarity and economy, and if they disagree a little with common opinion, then common opinion may be corrected, even by a philosopher.
The price is still too high.
We agree in principle, we're only haggling.
We do, and the same is true of our other debates over ontic parsimony. Indeed, this argument has served us as an illustration, novel, simple, and self-contained, of the nature of our customary disputes.
And yet, the illustration has interest in its own right. Your holes, had I been less successful, would have punctured my nominalistic materialism with the greatest of ease.
Rehearsed and refreshed, let us return to, say, the question of classes. There are 5 endnotes to this dialogue. The first one comes at the end of Argall's long monologue in part 2. It says to compare with Quine's very famous paper On What There Is, printed 1961, page 13. The second endnote also comes in the middle of part 2 after Bargall says, "And what does and so on mean?" It says to compare with Donald Davidson, Theories of Meaning and Learnable Languages, printed 1965, page 383 to 94. The third endnote comes at the very end of part 8, and it says to compare Quine's maxim of identification of indiscernibles in the paper Identity, Ostension, and Hypostasis, page 71, and with Geach's Identity, printed in 1967, page 3 to 12. The fourth endnote comes at the end of part 9, and it says, this translation adapts a device from Nelson Goodman and W.V. Quine's paper, Steps Toward a Constructive Nominalism, printed in 1947, page 109 to 10. The fifth endnote comes at the very end of the dialogue, and it says, there would be little truth to the guess that Argyle is one of the authors and Bargyle is the other. We thank Charles Chastain, who also is neither Argyle nor Bargyle, for many helpful comments. David Lewis, who is Adrian's idol, was born in 1941 and is widely regarded as one of the most important philosophers of the 20th century, possibly the most important philosopher of the 20th century. He made significant contributions in philosophy of mind, philosophy of probability, epistemology, philosophical logic, aesthetics, philosophy of mathematics, philosophy of time, philosophy of science, metaphysics, philosophy of language, and semantics. Oh, what a list. And you have likely heard of the idea of possible worlds. Yep, that was developed mainly by David Lewis, as were many other ideas. You can find a lovely portrait of him at the entrance of 1879 Hall, the philosophy department at Princeton University, where he taught from 1970 until his death in 2001. Stephanie Lewis, who was born in 1944, was David Lewis's wife. They met during a graduate philosophy course at Harvard, and they were married in 1965. She pursued graduate studies in philosophy until David's appointment at Princeton, upon which she moved with him to the East Coast, where she eventually acquired an MBA from UPenn's Wharton School and ventured to have a successful career in finance. She also served as the treasurer for APA, the American Philosophical Association. Thank you so much for listening. We hope that you enjoyed this great dialogue. The goal, the end, the telos of AristotleWalks is to make philosophy, in particular ancient, but also contemporary, more accessible. In creating this channel, I am thinking about serious students of philosophy who are auditory learners like me. I'm thinking about people who are interested in philosophy, but reading dense papers is a bit too much. I hope that listening to them is something one can approach lightheartedly. I am thinking about students considering the study of philosophy or in the beginnings of their journey who do not know to which papers they should turn. Here I will highlight the best papers, the most influential papers, the ones you should probably read first. To do this, I am getting help from my mentors and friends, some of whom are leading scholars in the field of philosophy today. Finally, and most importantly, I am thinking about students with vision impairments. I think that it is a huge problem that many fields of work, including, but actually particularly, academia, is so inaccessible for students with vision disabilities. My aim is to make philosophy accessible. I hope to build AristotleWalks into a helpful resource for a variety of learners. The YouTube channel AristotleWalks is a counterpart, an antistrophos, to my original Instagram account AristotleWalks, where I post excerpts of Aristotle's works. I would appreciate it if you followed it and or subscribed to this channel. Thank you, and I hope you have a lovely day.